Yeah, so a quick housekeeping items. First off, everyone is muted by default, and so that way there's no feedback between people while we're presenting. But if you have any questions or comments or things you want to be addressed during the webinar, on the right-hand side you have a gray strip. It's your GoToWebinar control panel. You may have to click on a red arrow to pull it out if it's collapsed, but you can type in the questions pane inside of that GoToWebinar control panel, whatever question you have. Myself and all of our staff here will see those questions, and if we have time to respond to them during the webinar, we'll do that. If not, we can respond to them offline as well. And so just to mention that ahead of time, you can type your questions in there and we'll get to them at the end of the webinar or offline. All right. The other thing is that this webinar recording will be available online after the webinar is completed. And so for anyone that wants reference to this after the fact, we are recording this webinar and we will post it on our, I believe it's our YouTube channel is where we post the recordings to. All right. And so we'll start off sharing my screen here, and we'll start off with the presentation. Now, today we're going to be covering running Modelcheck in batch mode. And so we're just going to go ahead and dive into the discussion and then continue on from there. Now, this is what our agenda for the day. We're basically going to cover, just a quick introduction on boundary systems and who we are. And then we'll get into Modelcheck, just again an overview on what is Modelcheck, and then why use it in batch mode specifically. We'll show a quick demo of that, and then we'll field some questions and answers afterwards. And so just so you're aware, then this is going to be more of a lighter webinar topic. This isn't something that's going to take up the entire hour. But again, it's something that's very useful for everyone to understand. Now, a quick introduction on boundary systems. We are a product development and consulting company based out of Cleveland, Ohio, but you have a reach that spans much more than just the Northwest region or Northeast region. We have many different customers that we've helped achieve many different levels of success in terms of doing product lifecycle management and CAD data management. Also doing a lot of CAD design and consulting, simulation as well. Wherever we are in the product development, lifecycle space, Boundary Systems has the expertise to help our customers achieve, greater things. All right. So just a quick reference on Modelcheck. So Modelcheck is a model analysis tool that is baked into Creo Parametric or Pro Engineer. It comes free with every seat, so even the cheapest or the most basic seat of Creo will have Modelcheck. And it basically is used to help enforce good design quality and also company standards as well. And so part of the benefit from Modelcheck is it sort of serves as a policeman that enforces certain rules that you define. So, for example, do you have any buried features? Because that has some certain or potentially negative design intent effects down the road. Or checking for things like do you have any missing layers, or do you have any features with edge references? Things that are either not good to have or will cause issues down the road. Now, some of the things that Modelcheck typically would check for, or you can use it to enforce, would be again company standards violations. So a good example is we always like to have the part number parameter populated. Well, you can have Modelcheck enforced to check for cases where that part number parameter isn't there, right? Because then that's you have to send the model back to the designer to say, hey, put this part number in there, right? or things like, poor modeling practices, so again, early rounds or buried features or things like that, to where it either creates a very, very poor model that will then take a lot of time and effort downstream in the design cycle to fix, or it may be such a bad model that you may just have to decide to completely scrap it and start designing it from scratch all over again, which again is just a waste of engineering time. And then the last piece of it there that model check can also check for would be things like manufacturability or production issues. So for example, if this is a job we're going to send to a 3D printer, we can have model check automatically analyze the model to see, hey, can I tessellate and generate an STL of this model? If so, let me know. If not, then I'm already shooting myself in the foot right before I get to producing this particular part, right? And so those are some of the things that model check can take a look at and check for. Now, model check can also be used in a variety of different ways. Typically, it can be used in interactive mode, regeneration mode, batch mode, and also save mode as well. Now, three of those, interactive, regeneration, and save, are all used when Creo Parametric is opened by the user. So in other words, you would manually double-click on Creo Parametric to open it up. For interactive mode, you would pick on a button there to run interactive mode, and then it'll show you what the results are. For save mode, whenever Creo is open and you save, then it will immediately run and then show you what the results are. And likewise in regeneration mode, whenever you're modeling and your Creo session regenerates, it will then pop out to it'll check your model and then pop out to show you what the results are. Now, in this particular case, we have already run model check, we've already covered a webinar. I believe this was maybe about 6 months ago or so, on using model check in interactive, save, and regeneration modes inside of Creo. And we have a recording of that already on our website, and so we won't go over the same material again. This particular webinar is going to cover using model check in batch mode, which is something we haven't talked about yet. Now, why use model check in batch mode? And first off, I guess part of the other question then is, what is batch mode? And batch mode is basically a mode where you're using model check without Creo graphically in session. So in other words, you don't have a window of Creo Parametric that's open. So Creo Parametric is open in the background. And then the second piece is that you're using it to analyze many, many different files, right? Because the sort of the downside of the first three modes I talked about, interactive, regeneration, and save, is that you have to manually go open a file, and model check will analyze that one particular file you have open or at your disposal, right? So if we just acquired a company and they have all their CAD data, 2,000 different files, and we want to make some changes on those files, I would have to open each one of those files 2,000 times to run model check on those to make certain changes, right? But with batch mode, we can tell model check where all the files are, and it'll then go ahead sequentially and open each and every single file, make the change, and then come back and show us what the results are, right? And so that's really the benefit of model check in batch mode. And so some of the things you can manage or change with model check in batch mode would be things like managing layers. So moving items from one layer to another, or creating layers, deleting layers, renaming layers, adding or removing relations from models, adding or removing parameters from models as well. Or adding or removing datums or renaming datums inside of your model as well. Those are many of the things you would typically be able to do in batch mode. with model check just automatically running. And so at this point, we'll pause for a second and get into a quick demo on using model check in batch mode. All right, so here we are now. Now, the first thing you'll notice is I don't have a session of Creo Parametric open right now to run model check in batch mode. Really, all I just have is a folder, right? Now, I can do a couple of things with that folder. Let's actually move this over. I can do a couple of things with that folder in order to set it up to run model check in batch mode. The first thing I need to do, if I'll go over to this what's it called, shortcut over here. First thing I need to do is I need to go look for model check wherever it's wherever the shortcut is on my computer. So in this case, for this computer, it's PTC Creo model check M100. I can go ahead and send a shortcut to my desktop, right? And then I can then take that shortcut and basically put it into, the folder where I have the parts to check. In this case, I wanted to check all these different parts from, from here all the way to here, right? Using my config.pro that I have. Now, so now in this case, I put this shortcut in this location. The reason for that is so that way model check knows where the files are, right? Now, the other thing I just mentioned, my config.pro, is the config.pro is what's going to tell model check where to find the model check files that it should use. So in other words, when we configure model check, we configure it based on certain rules. So we tell it, hey, check for A, and if A is equal to 1, that's good. If A is not equal to 1, then set it equal to 1, right? And so those check files or those configuration files we define are pointed to by this config.pro file. And so if I just want to go, I'll just step back to show you where those are. So for example, I'll move back up one level and go to the config folder, and I'll go to my check file, and this is where those checks are. So for example, I will pick on this file, and now all of these files are editable either inside of Creo Parametric itself. You can open Creo and there's a section there where you can modify or edit model check configurations, or they're all text editable. So you can open it in Notepad++ or even Notepad and WordPad and still edit it that way. Right? Now some of the things that you'd be able to take a look at, for example, with model check is this over here. When you're configuring it, you'll notice the columns stand for what the check is going to be. So for example, interactive mode, batch mode, regeneration, and save mode, right? And so the one we're going to be taking a look at is the second column, which is batch mode. And for all of these different checks that are defined, these areas here tell model check what to do whenever it encounters those particular items. So for example, we can see over here the option here for extra layers, and there's a Y. And so Y and EW basically corresponds to yes, no, error, or warning. And so for yes or no, that would be model check to just check to see if it's there or if it's not there. If it's there, report it. If it's not, don't report it. And E or W, or error or warning, is in the case where you're running model check interactively, And whenever it analyzes, it'll generate an error or a warning saying, hey, something is wrong here, and I'll pull out an error or a warning to notify you of that, right? Now, in this particular case, for example, for extra layers, one of the things that we've told Modelcheck to do is just to check for that and to see if it finds it in there, right? And so Modelcheck is going to go ahead and check for that, in batch mode using this over here, right? Now, part of the benefit of using Modelcheck in batch mode is if it then finds extra layers, it will then go ahead and delete them or remove them, right? Because again, we want to have all our company parts consistent. Now, how does Modelcheck know if there are extra layers in our model? Well, that would be, for example, given by the start file, right? So if I go to the start file, say for example, I'll pick on this one over here, and I'll edit this with Notepad++. The start file is what tells Modelcheck what our files, what our initial start part should look like, what our Holy Grail CAD part should look like, right? So the start file is what tells Modelcheck the Holy Grail of our CAD file should look like this. There should be, 3 datum planes, and they should be named a particular way, right? And they should be, a particular order in the model tree history, right? It tells it, hey, we want to have these 2 views, top view and front view in every CAD model, right? Or we want to have all of these different kinds of parameters in every CAD model. Or in our case specifically, we want to have all these different layers inside of our CAD models. We want to set the display of those layers to either shown or hidden or blanked. And we also then want to specify what items should be on those layers, right? So in the case of axes, we want to put any axes features and datum axes in that layer. And so this is where Modelcheck can then understand what the reference is that it's comparing against. Now, another thing would be, how does Modelcheck know to use this specific check file, or this specific start file, I should say? It does that because if we go back one level again, we can take a look at at the conditions file. And this is the one that basically defines for it what to do. So basically the condition file, tells it, if you see something, then do something else, right? And the conditions file, this is something that can be tweaked many different ways. So for example, we could say, we could create multiple check files for different unit systems, right? So if we're having it check for accuracy, which is a numerical value, our accuracy in metric units would be different from our accuracy in English units, right? So we can tell the check file over here, hey, if the model unit is in inches, then use our check file that's defined for English units, right? If the model unit is in millimeters, use our check file that's defined for metric units, right? Or if you see a parameter in the model that says no start, then don't check that part, which is this over here, no check, right? If you see no check, don't check it. Or if the model size is large, then perform a specific check. Check for sharp edges, or don't check for sharp edges in this case, because that'll significantly increase the check time, right? And so this is what tells Modelcheck which files to use. And so I'll sort of recap that again in terms of the setup, and that basically goes by this. Modelcheck will first off read in this conditions file, and based on these conditions files, this tells it which of the check files to use, right? Now, once it knows which check file to use, it then goes into the check file and starts looking into that to see, okay, what are the different checks? Now, some of these checks will require something else to be defined in the start part. So, for example, extra layers, right? It has to know what layers are expected for it to know what else is extra. And so when it comes to this, it'll then have to go reference the start check file to say, hey, what are the things that are required? So that way, if I see anything else that's not required, I know that's extra, right? And so that's the flow in which Modelcheck will typically run and analyze your models. But again, this is not an exhaustive, intro into configuring Modelcheck. This is just explaining a little bit of behind-the-scenes workflow on what's going on. Now I'll switch back to folder where we have all our parts, and the other thing we want to do is we want to go where Creo is installed on our computer. So say open file location, and we just want to make a copy of the batch file, so parametric.bat in this case. Make a copy of that in the folder where we have all our parts, right? Now, once we have this in there, the way we would run the checks is to start the start the shortcut. Now, before we do that, let me actually right-click here, hit Properties. Yeah. The last thing you would want to do is you'd want to change this Start In to either be the same folder where you have your files, or you can just put a a period, and that will also start it. Or you could have it empty, and that would start it in the default folder here. In this case, we already have the path in there. And then finally, what you want to do is you want to have a list of all of the different parts that are inside of that folder that you want Modelcheck to check for. So in this case, I want to have a list of all these different parts to say, hey, check bearing.prt, bolt.prt, and all these different files, right? Now, it would be very tedious to have you manually go ahead and start writing all of these out in a list, right? And so there's a very easy way to create this. It's this. So I'll just pick in here, for example, type in CMD for command prompt window, and the command prompt window opens inside of this directory that I already have. And all I need to do is type in a command that says, dir, and I'll say search for all, part files, dot asterisk, all assembly files, dot asterisk, and also all drawing files. Now in this case, in Creo Parametric speak, I'll just mention this. An asterisk is a wildcard, so that basically says search for everything. And then I'll say, hey, and when you're done searching for all of those, write out their names using that greater than symbol into a file. And so I could say, test.txt, or it could be an LST file as well. Either of the two would work, a text file or an LST file, right? And if I hit enter now, Windows will automatically check this entire directory for any files that have these ends, right? PRT, ASM, DRW, and write their names out inside of this text file. That is exactly how I got this list over here, right? So I didn't spend 30 minutes or an hour writing out those file names. And so once I have everything, I can go ahead and start this over here. I double click on the shortcut, it pulls out this dialog box, and I could go ahead over here and pick on batch mode because that's what we want to run. Now this file over here tells it what the list of files are that it should be checking for, and in this case we just tell it to check or to use the list file that we just created, which has the names of all the files in there, right? Next is we tell it what the Creo command should be. So whenever Creo it's running in batch mode, Modelcheck will use a license of Creo. It will launch Creo in the background. You're not going to see it, pop out on screen, but it will use a license of Creo. So that's the reason why we basically copied in here the parametric.bat. So that way we can just tell it, hey, use parametric.bat. This batch file already has everything inside of it to tell Modelcheck where Creo is, how to start Creo, and what licenses to grab. And so all we do now is hit run. And now Modelcheck will start running. Yeah. And now you'll notice I all of a sudden begin to see a whole bunch of files pop out, and then it pulls out this web browser window. Well, what's basically going on is this. And finally, those the Modelcheck programs have collapsed, right? Well, that's because it's done. It's completed the checks. And as part of the checks, I told it to save out the most recent version once it's done. And so it made some changes, and then it saved out all those different files again. That's why I have the most recent files all the way up top, right? Now, I can do things like, for example, take a look at file do I want to see here? Is this? No. Okay, yes. So taking a look at this mcerr.log file, this gives you an idea of some of the things that Modelcheck did. So for example, it says, hey, I'm going to open a particular file now, bearing.prt, and I'm going to do some checks inside of it, right? So, one of the things you wanted to add was a parameter called company, and I successfully added that parameter to the bearing.prt file, right? We wanted to designate the material parameter for a PDM system. I successfully did that, right? For any other parameters that we didn't want to have, I deleted those, right? I added, all these different layers, and on and on and on. And so and then finally, when it's done, it says, hey, I saved the bearing.prt with all the updates I made, and now I'm going to go ahead and continue to the next file, right? And so Modelcheck has gone ahead, checked everything, made all the changes that I need to, made all the changes that are necessary, and it's gone ahead to save those as well, right? So again, all the automatic changes, I should say, that are necessary, it's gone ahead and made those automatically. Now, for the changes that are not automatic, that a user needs to actually investigate and check, those changes it pulls out in this Modelcheck batch summary report inside of a web browser, right? And in this case, we can then manually start to query these errors here, and we can start to check these to say, okay, what's going on inside of all these different models, right? So I don't know, for example, in this case, naming convention is off, right? For this particular model. All these other ones, layer, place, and status, Modelcheck automatically fixed those, and so we'll skip that. But again, it's basically checking for other items that couldn't be automatically fixed. So for example, buried features. Buried feature can't be automatically fixed. A user would have to go manually check and fix that. Or a duplicate model, right? That can't be automatically fixed. You would have to go manually check and fix that. But again, this has, all the seeds in there for you to automatically check many different files, automatically change things that need to be changed without user intervention. And for those that do need user intervention, it'll then pull out a report to show you what those are, so that way you can go investigate and fix those, right? So from a user perspective, this covers and also sort of an admin perspective as well. This covers everything from, how to set up Modelcheck to run in batch mode and then running it in batch mode to see what the results are. So at this point, I'll go ahead and flip back to our presentation here. And at this point now, we'll start fielding questions and answers. If you have any questions for me at this point, based on what you've seen so far, how else we can configure Modelcheck, now would be the time to ask all those questions. And again, I'll remind everyone, you can type your questions in the questions panel of the Gotowebinar control pane on the right-hand side. There's a section there for questions. You can type those in, and we'll go ahead and answer those. All right. First question here is it possible to run Modelcheck on the Windchill server? And the answer for that is yes. It is possible to do that. That is, let's see here. Okay, so I'll pull out the Creo help material, and let's see here. Yeah, here we go. About performing PTC performing batch mode tasks in a PTC Windchill environment, right? And so this has the content needed to to look at, or I guess that talks about performing those batch mode tasks inside of the Windchill environment, right? Now, I didn't configure this particular webinar to show that or demo that, and so I don't have a live demo example to show on running Modelcheck in batch mode on the Windchill environment. But again, if that's something that we could potentially reserve for another future webinar session on running Modelcheck specifically on a Windchill server. But again, the instructions are there. You can get to it in the Creo help files, and we may consider running that as a future webinar topic. All right. Any other questions? Great. Great. So it looks like we're out of questions, and so we'll just go ahead and call it a day here. I mentioned this was going to be a shorter webinar. Again, if you have any other questions, my contact information is up on the screen. You can give me a call or send me an email. If you need any help later on in the future configuring Modelcheck, that's something that Boundary Systems does offer as a service to our customers, and so you can reach out to us, or even if you just have a quick question about a quick tip or something, you can always reach out to us as well. Thanks a lot, and we will see you again next week on a future version of Boundaries Webinar Wednesdays.